This week in Idaho, the Ninth Circuit weighs Idaho's abortion ban against federal law. Boise State Broncos triumph at Ablertsons Stadium. Also, Albertsons merger collapses. Plus an update on the Lava Ridge wind project and so much more. This is the Yocal Idaho Midweek Report, where we give you a quick overview of the news in Idaho for the last week. Hey, glad to have you back. Hopefully you are having a wonderful time leading up to Christmas here. I know we are here at Local Yocal, and specifically with this midweek report, we've got a lot of fun stories. Speaking of which, with that first story, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals has heard arguments on Idaho's strict abortion ban, focusing on its potential conflict with federal emergency care laws. At the heart of the debate is whether EMTALA, because that has to be a massive acronym, which requires hospitals to provide life-saving emergency care, includes abortions when medically necessary to stabilize a patient. So there's two positions, as you can guess with any court thing. Specifically on Idaho's side, our attorneys have contended that state law doesn't conflict with federal regulations, citing the exception under the law for the mother's life and fetal protection under EMTALA. However, for the federal side of things, their attorneys are arguing that federal law should take precedent under the Constitution's Supremacy Clause, which is something you also see with FAA and a couple other institutions, which isn't a bad thing per se, but they're trying to stretch it a bit here. But as the case progresses here, it does have some significant implications for Idaho's healthcare providers and patients, specifically on the abortion side of things, because it is a hot topic issue. Before the 2022 injunction over cautious actions, which is probably the best way to put it, by hospitals because of the law, led to some pregnant patients being airlifted out of state for care, because they didn't want to do it here, fearing the law's implications. The court's pending decision will impact how hospitals and doctors approach emergency decisions in Idaho, specifically with pregnancies. It will be very interesting to see how the federal courts will decide. And speaking of things with big impact, and if you've been on social media, even if you are not a political nerd, you've probably heard about this one. Boise State Broncos etched their names into the Mountain West history, clinching their second consecutive conference championship with a commanding 21-7 victory over UNLV. In a game that electrified Albertsons Stadium, quarterback Maddox Madison and running back Ashton Genty led a spectacular offensive performance that showcased the team's depth and determination. Genty, though falling short of Barry Sanders' legendary rushing record, delivering a historic performance with 209 rushing yards and broke two school records. Madison completed the ground game with precise passing, throwing for over 150 yards and connecting on a crucial touchdown for Latrell Caples. But moving forward, the Broncos' defense was equally impressive, holding the Rebels just to 7 points and securing their sixth Mountain West title. This victory not only crowns them conference champions, but also punches their ticket to the inaugural 12-team college football playoff, cementing a truly historic season for Boise State. And speaking of the name of the stadium and the company behind it, a proposed $25 billion merger between Kroger and Albertsons has spectacularly unraveled after a series of legal setbacks. The first of the issues being that the U.S. District Judge Andrea Nelson and Washington Superior Court Judge Marshall Ferguson, who issued injunctions blocking the deal, citing significant antitrust concerns and potential harm to consumer competition. For their part, the Federal Trade Commission argued that the merger would negatively impact consumers through higher prices and reduced choices. So basically, less competition going on because you have less people in the game. This second issue, however, in a surprising escalation, Albertsons filed a lawsuit against Kroger, that did not go too well, in the Delaware Court of Chancery, alleging a breach of contract and seeking billions in damages, including a $600 million termination fee. In conclusion, as the deal is just disintegrating, Kroger's dismissed Albertsons' claims as baseless, making a bitter conclusion to what would have been the largest grocery store merger in U.S. history. The legal battle does highlight the complex regulatory challenges facing major corporate mergers, leaving the future of this grocery chain to be decided in the free market. And going a little bit southeast of Boise, and a topic that has got a lot of attention, the Lava Ridge Wind Project has united a fierce controversy in Idaho's Magic Valley, pitting renewable energy ambitions against local community interests. Particularly, if you haven't been keeping up on it, the Bureau of Land Management, or BLM, not Black Lives Matter, sorry, we're talking about the land part, approved a scaled-down version of the project, authorizing about 231 turbines across about 60,000 acres, primarily aimed at powering California homes, being the primary consumers of it. But looking at Idaho's leadership, including Attorney General Ralph Labrador, we've heard his name quite often, and Governor Brad Little, who vehemently opposed the project, their concerns center on potential impacts to farms, ranches, wildlife, and historic sites, and on that last one, particularly the Minidoka National Historical Site, which people over there at the Minidoka organization have raised significant cultural preservation concerns as well with this project moving forward. But the takeaway is, while opponents highlight the project's potential to generate 1,200 megawatts of power for over 500,000 homes, local stakeholders argue that Idaho bears the environmental and cultural cost, while California reaps the benefits. Going a little bit more national, Senator Jim Risch has pledged to work towards halting the project, symbolizing the deep-rooted resistance to what many see as an imposed green energy agenda that disregards local voices. And speaking of renewable energy projects trying to gain momentum in Idaho's Magic Valley, Gooding County is taking steps to regulate wind and solar power developments on private lands. The county's Planning and Zoning Commission recently held a hearing on a draft ordinance that would establish guidelines for acceptable energy development, which, as you can guess, drawed hundreds of concerned citizens, because this is a topic here in Idaho that we're just a little bit touchy on. But specifically looking at the proposed ordinance, it aims to protect property owners' investments while addressing the community's concerns about the impacts of large-scale energy projects. It defines eligible areas for wind and solar installations, prohibiting developments on prime farmland, and stabilizing the preservation of historic and cultural resources. Specifically looking at the reaction to the whole thing, Terry Dorchuk, a Hagerman resident, exemplifies the growing unease among locals. Living near the Snake River for over 11 years, she now faces the prospect of a battery storage facility being built adjacent to her property. But moving forward with the draft ordinance, which has been updated based on public input, it is set to return to the Planning and Zoning Commission for further consideration in January. So if you want to get on that. As Gooding County navigates this modern issue, the outcome of this ordinance could set a precedent for other counties grappling with similar challenges in facing rapid renewable energy expansion, which may or may not be the right thing. We did a story about that up in Donnelly where they wanted to put a solar array in an area that snows most of the time. I don't know. That's its own issue there. And speaking of opposed things and going back to Boise, so heading westward, Boise State University abruptly closed its Student Equity Center and Gender Equality Center during Thanksgiving break, informing students via email on Tuesday during finals week. So a little bit of a touch close there. The center, which has existed under various names, were shuttered on November 29th. BSU administrators cited anticipation of potential State Board of Education's resolutions restricting diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI programs, which we've talked about. They are on the warpath with that, on college campuses as the reason for the closure. The university plans to replace these centers with new student connection and support centers, which the name changed, but it'll be curious to see if they play the same function and how the state board handles that. Offering services such as first-generation programs, case management, and crisis intervention. But getting a little bit of a broader context on this, this move follows similar actions by other Idaho universities in lieu of possible legislation coming down the pipe in January. Idaho State University eliminated its Office of Equity and Inclusion on November 14th, while on the flip side, the University of Idaho initially planned to disband its Equity and Diversity Unit, but later postponed the decision, so it'll be seeing what happens there. But in conclusion, the closures have sparked debate, with some joyful and others concerned, mainly among students for that concern part, who say they relied on these centers for support and community, which, as legislation moves forward, it'll be interesting to see if it was a good or bad thing to close these. We would argue probably a good thing. And speaking of another department, and they're in Boise, the Idaho Department of Health and Welfare, or IDHW, is seeking to end a COVID-era program that would allow family members to be paid as caregivers for disabled relatives. The Family Personal Care Service Program, which began during the pandemic, as you can guess there, is set to conclude on January 31st, 2025, so about 1 year roughly from this time, pending federal approval. Now, the reasoning behind this, IDHW cites rising costs, increased enrollment, and alleged fraud as reasons for termination, that one being the largest part of it. The program is currently $4 million over budget, with a 75% increase in enrollment since 2023. Officials reported thousands of cases of suspected abuse, including falsified care hours and excessive time logging. Moving forward, while IDHW acknowledges the program's importance for many families, they stress the need for stronger oversight. Juliet Charon, Idaho's Medicaid's deputy director, expressed hope for potential reinstatement with legislative support and additional funding. Meanwhile, affected families are meeting with legislatures to explore solutions as we go into the 2025 session. Heading nationally and keeping with the medical theme, a federal judge in North Dakota has blocked a Biden administration rule that would have provided Obamacare benefits to illegal immigrants, including DACH recipients, which that's been a little bit of a hot topic here in Idaho. Now, specifically how this all played out, Idaho Attorney General Rao Labrador, along with 18 other states' attorneys generals, successfully sued to stop the implementation of this rule. The coalition led by Kansas Attorney General Chris Kobach argued that the rule violated federal law prohibiting public benefits for illegal immigrants and contradicted the Affordable Care Act's requirements. The court granted a preliminary injunction, so that tells you it's not quite over, preventing the rule from taking effect. As for Idaho's reaction in this whole thing, Labrador hailed the decision as, quote, another solid victory for the rule of law, end quote, emphasizing that federal statutes clearly prohibit illegal immigrants from receiving Obamacare benefits. He criticized both the Biden administration and illegal immigrants for disregarding federal laws. As for the effects of this decision, the blocked rule has prevented 200,000 illegals, including 2,760 in Idaho, from being able to access taxpayer-subsidized health plans, which, depending on the listener that's listening to this, you may see that as a good or bad thing. We've hit on a couple hot button topics in the midweek report this week, which, if you didn't know about them, and or you know some family members that should know about them, please don't hesitate to share it. Your shares help us spread the word about our beautiful state. And coming back from the national to the local, and specifically with the Idaho legislature, Idaho Senator Brian Lenney from Nampa has announced his resignation from the Idaho Freedom Caucus, citing a need to eliminate distractions and focus on his role as a legislator, father, and husband. Lenney's departure follows his earlier decision to cut ties with other groups he described as, quote, chaos-driven, end quote. Now, having a little bit of a broader view here of what's going on with IFC, a potential legal dispute looms over several Idaho Freedom Caucus members. The State Freedom Caucus Network, or SFCN, a Washington, D.C.-based nonprofit affiliated with the House Freedom Caucus, is considering legal action against some members of the Idaho group. The conflict appears to center around a trademark issue concerning the FCN's logo and the name Idaho Freedom Caucus. This development follows earlier tensions between the SFCN and Idaho-based group, with SFCN President Andy Roth publicly denouncing several members. The situation highlights the independent dynamics within conservative political circles in Idaho, and the challenges, especially out west here, with aligning state-level groups with national organizations. There is a point that you want to have unity in groups, but there's a little bit to be said to have unity and to move as one, but here in the United States it's hard because we're Lone Rangers at time. But moving forward, the Idaho Freedom Caucus has been struggling with internal divisions and external pressures, reflecting a broader tension within the conservative movement here in Idaho, which is sad to see. As the 2025 legislative session approaches, which you're probably well aware of if you've listened to this show, the focus remains on whether these conservative legislatures can unite for the good of Idaho, or if their differences will tear them apart. And speaking of things in the capital of Idaho, Boise, former Boise Police Chief Ryan Lee's tenure and subsequent departure in 2022 If you don't remember, all of it sparked a series of events that significantly impacted the city and Lee's career. Adding some extra context there, Mayor Lauren McLean requested his resignation amid officer complaints and a controversial neck injury incident, setting the stage for legal battles and an unexpected career shift. Particularly looking at the biggest component of this story, the cost. The aftermath of Lee's departure proved costly for Boise financially and legally. The city faced multiple lawsuits, resulting in settlements totaling $1.5 million and $675,000 to former OP Director Jesus Jar for wrongful termination. Legal fees also surpassed about $900,000 to bring the total expense to nearly $2.7 million, partially offset by insurance coverage. Despite these challenges, or setbacks you might look at it, Lee's law enforcement career has not ended there. In a surprising development, Lee has recently been appointed as the new chief of detectives for the Baltimore Police Department. Following a 4-month hiring process, the Baltimore Police Commissioner Richard Worley praised Lee's 22 years of experience and leadership skills. Lee, who moved to Baltimore with his wife about a year ago, expressed enthusiasm for his new role and focusing on community policing and fostering partnerships. And staying with things with the Boise City Council, it is reversing its wage increase proposal for the mayor and council members after discovering a math error. The initial plan, presented by council member Jimmy Halliburton in November, aimed to compensate for slow raises during the 2019 pandemic. However, the proposed increase was actually 12.8 instead of the stated 6%, so a little bit of a discrepancy there. As for the reaction from the council members, Council President Colin Nash and President Pro Temp Meredith Steed have withdrawn the proposal from consideration. Nash has suggested a new ordinance with a one-time 6% increase in 2026, followed by an annual 3% raise through 2023. Halliburton acknowledged the mistake, but maintains that his original numbers were correct, despite misstating the percentage. He plans to counter Nash's proposal with a revised plan, arguing for higher increases to keep pace with Boise's cost of living, because it's the biggest city here in the state, and cost of living just seems to always go up with that. But moving forward, the council will now consider the wage increase options, balancing political concerns with the need for sustainable and equitable compensation for elected officials. And going from where Boise is located in Ada County and over to Canyon County, its leaders are seeking to override the hotel plans approved by the Caldwell City Council. We've talked about this a little bit if you remember our episode a couple weeks back. The controversy centers around a proposed 100-room hotel development on the dirt lot in front of the Canyon County Fairgrounds. County commissioners held a public meeting to discuss concerns, but Caldwell City Council members did not attend. As for the commissioners' desires, they are worried that the hotel project could raise the county-wide taxes and impact the Canyon County Fair. They hope to find a balance and prevent what they call a potential domino effect in the project's proceedings. But going a little bit more broader, the community members, including students and fair participants, expressed concern about the cultural significance of the fairground and the rising cost of living in the area, because it is not getting any cheaper here in the Treasure Valley, I will tell you that. The Griffith family, who dedicated portions of the land for the fair, also weighed in on the matter. But moving forward, following the commissioners' meeting, the committee members held a town hall meeting to discuss, one, their response, and explore solutions to protect what they consider an important cultural ground. If you want to keep up to date with any of the stories we've talked about, or you just love Idaho, make sure to subscribe or follow us so you don't miss any of our future content. And going outside the Treasure Valley in the rugged landscape of Clark County, over by Idaho Falls, a battle is brewing over the future of the area's wilderness, specifically the Exxon Idaho Gold Inc., a subsidiary of a Canadian-based Exxon Resources, has initiated exploratory drilling near Kilgore, sparking some fierce opposition from environmental groups, as any mining corporation does. Specifically, the Clean Kilgore Coalition, comprising of 8 organizations, is spearheading the effort to halt the project. They argue that the potential open-pit heap leach cyanide gold mine threatens wildlife habitats, recreational areas, and the county's rural character. Despite these legal challenges, however, the exploratory drilling continues, with Exelon aiming to balance economic growth with environmental stewardship. The project covers about 12,000 acres and allows for about 140 drilling sites. Opponents are now focusing on raising awareness and exploring legislative options. However, this development could strengthen Idaho's position in the mining industry while providing valuable jobs and economic growth for the local areas. And speaking of the environment and going back to the Treasure Valley, because we can't get away from it, Boise's new electric car sharing program, launched by a nonprofit organization, Go Forth, is raising eyebrows in the community. Specifically looking at the program, it is the Affordable Mobility Program, offers 2 EVs for rent at $5 per hour or $50 per day. Stationed at the Franklin EV Station and St. Luke's EV Station, while the initiative aims to provide affordable, clean transportation options, some question the involvement of a nonprofit in what seems like a potential profitable venture. Specifically, questions are circling on that and some context. The program, primarily funded by the U.S. Department of Energy's Vehicle Technology Office, because the federal government needs to fund more private entity things, plans to deploy 50 EVs across 8 states by 2025. Across 8 states, not in each state. Mayor Laura McLean praised the program for expanding transportation options, but critics wonder if a for-profit model might be a more suitable long-term solution rather than having the federal government being involved in it. But moving forward with all of that said, users can reserve cars through the Modo car sharing app after an approval process. The program's success and impact on Boise's transportation landscape does remain to be seen, so we'll have to see as it progresses here. And coming to our second to last story, and speaking of the thing that those electric cars consume, Idaho power consumers may face a higher bills coming 2025. The utility has requested a rate increase from the Idaho Public Utilities Commission, citing the need for infrastructure improvements and inflation adjustments. If approved, resident consumers could see a 5.73% increase, averaging about $5.86 more per month. However, for commercial consumers and a couple others, they'll face some different rates, specifically with the commercial side of it. They'll see about a 5.61% or 6.08% hike, while farmers might experience a steeper 7.87% rise. As for Idaho Power's stance on the whole thing, Coney Aschenbrenner, Idaho Power's rate design senior manager, emphasized the company's commitment to affordability while acknowledging the necessity of the increase. The additional $83 million in revenue could fund system upgrades and reliability improvements. As for the Public Utilities Commission's reaction on this, Idaho Public Utilities is reviewing the proposal through a technical hearing process. Adam Rush from the commission explained that they have the authority to approve, deny, or modify the request, ensuring rates remain fair and reasonable while maintaining safe and reliable service. But with all that technical jargon, what does that mean for you? If greenlit, the new rates would take effect on January 1st, 2025. Might need to save a little bit more for power, but thankfully nationally we have some of the cheapest power. I guess that's a good thing. Hopefully it doesn't go up too much more. And closing out on some ice cream, Stella's Ice Cream, a popular Nampa-based chain, is facing a $321,015 fine for child labor violation at its Boise, Caldwell, Eagle, and Nampa stores. Man, I had to run through that pretty quick. It's a big sentence. Specifically looking at the violation, the U.S. Department of Labor found the company employed children to operate industrial mixers, driving delivery vans, and working past 10:30 p.m. Federal regulation prohibits 14 and 15-year-olds from working past 7 p.m., except between June 1st and Labor Day when hours are extended to 9 p.m. You learn something new every single day. The investigation also revealed illegal tip-sharing practices with managers and supervisors, resulting in a $79,463 in back wages and damages for 208 workers. As for how Stella's is reacting to this, their owner, Chad Hartley, accepted responsibility but disagreed with the, quote, grossly disproportionate fines, end quote, citing contradictions between Idaho and federal laws and claiming the equipment used was commonly found in households, so it wasn't some commercial grade things that the kids were just working with normal appliances. That brings us to the end of the episode here. Thank you for listening to the entire report. I sincerely hope you found it enjoyable and valuable. If you like the Midweek Report, please make sure to check out our other content. We're always working hard on that. Also, if we missed any important points or provided incorrect information, please feel free to reach out to us via email on Twitter or by tweeting me at local Yocal, Idaho. With the small team we have here, we're not able to cover everything, but we do our best to cover the most interesting and important stories. Thank you for your continued support and assistance. That's all for now, and I wish you a fantastic rest of your week. Godspeed.